Hi, I'm Andy Villamarzo with SBLive Sports Florida, and thank you for joining us for our 20th episode of The Coastal. It's our high school football podcast we've been doing all throughout the season here, and we've been talking about every area, every region, city, and one we haven't really touched on, and I feel like be remiss if we didn't, is that Gainesville area, Alachua County, Levy County. And I'm bringing in an expert, bringing in a sports editor with the Mainstreet Daily News. He also runs his website, The Prep Zone, does great work, does a podcast himself. Bringing on Mike Ridaught. And Mike, thank you for coming on with us and ready to talk some Gainesville area, Alachua County, Levy County football.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we've got some pretty good football teams in this area this year, especially in Class 1R.
Yes, a lot of good teams in that one rule classification. But before we get to the slew of teams in that Class 1R classification, we got to talk about the team that I think maybe some people, even myself, wasn't quite sure under a new head coach how they would respond. And that is the Buchholz Bobcats. They're obviously undefeated right now. They're coming off a huge win, 44-7 over Bartram Trail last week. And Trace Johnson probably had one of his top, best performances as a Bobcat. And talk about these guys here. Last year they make the run to state. They fall just short at Venice. Seems like these guys under a mission under new head coach Chuck Bell there, and they've been playing really well.
Yeah, Chuck Bell has been a part of the staff. He was the defensive coordinator. So although he is in his first year as the head coach, he's not new to the program. And I think that had a lot to do with why Mark Whittemore, the previous coach, felt pretty good about handing him the reins of this program. It's really kind of hard to believe, Andy, that this team is doing so well when you consider the fact that, my goodness, they lost so many good players last year. They lost for the first time ever, the first ever Mr. Football for Alachua County. He was actually given this by a sports writer Jacksonville the moniker Alachua County Superman, and Creed Whittemore had an unbelievable year last year. He accounted for almost 4,000 yards. He's now at Mississippi State. So you lose him. You lose Jaron Hamilton, who was a wide receiver and signed with the University of Alabama. Jakari Kelly, kind of an athlete, but also kind of a slot receiver, a guy that signed with Delaware, so another Division I signee. Then you throw in Gavin Hill, who's at the University of Florida, Donnie Hebert, who had over 100 tackles last year. He's playing baseball at Florida State. Or actually, I think he's a preferred walk-on at Florida State in football. But again, really good talent from last year's team. And then to think, how could this team be better this year? Well, you mentioned Johnson. He got off to a somewhat of a slow start, but again, he's only a sophomore, 15 years old at the time, 378 yards passing last week. I think that was probably the biggest eye opener. Not so much that they beat Bartram Trail last week, but how convincing of a victory it was against the Bears, because this is a matchup, it's traditionally been a tough matchup for Buchholz. Last year, the two teams split. Bartram Trail defeated Buchholz during the regular season to win the 4S District 3 title. The two teams met again. Buchholz won by 1 point at Bartram Trail in the region final to advance to the state semifinals, where they lost to Venice. So the fact that they're undefeated right now, and by the way, they're seeking their first undefeated season since 2001. And now that they've gotten past Bartram Trail, I think they can get there. They've got Fleming Island coming up. It's another district game. Obviously, you can't look past that type of a game. But then you go to Trinity Catholic in Ocala. And Trinity Catholic, you look at their overall record, it may not be as good, but they were in the state championship game in their classification last year. A smaller school. I think it's a game that Buchholz can win, even though it's on the road, and they will get that first undefeated season in a long time. And, it's hard to believe that Buchholz is right up there, number one in at least one of the state rankings, having a great year this year.
And I guess I just haven't jumped completely and hard to believe I haven't, just because the run they've been on, the win they just had, and I know that loss to Venice last year really stung, but it seems like you can't help but look at Buchholz as a team that can this time around not only get to the state championship in Class 4S, but won't have to take a far bus ride to get over to the state title game since it's going to be in Tallahassee, and possibly just go ahead and win it all. And all those names you said from last year that they lost, uh, it's been hard for me to think, wow, they could not only get back to the states, but they could get to the state title game, and it could be them and Venice. Who knows? I mean, because Lakeland's kind of dropped off a little bit, it seems, with 3 losses. It seems like it's more wide open than anyone would have thought.
Yeah, and the good news is, right now they're sitting at number 1 in their region, Region 1. So that means that they would host through at least regional play, and then you would have to think if they can hold on to that number 1 ranking in the FHSA rankings, once they reseed the teams for the state semifinals, they could be at home all the way until the state championship game. So again, it's hard to believe that, we're talking about the Bobcats. I didn't expect this, but I have seen them play. And honestly, Andy, there's a guy by the name of Miles Graham who has made a huge impact with his football team. He is a man amongst boys. As you know, he's a University of Florida commit as a linebacker. But when Quentin Cutler, their running back, went down with an injury for a couple of games, Miles stepped in, ran for over 200 yards, which was a career high in a win that they had to get in district play against Creekside. And, he's a difference maker on defense too. So you mix that in with, the top players they have this year, Kendall Jackson, also a Florida commit. I mentioned Cutler. They've had some young guys step up to the play of Johnson at quarterback, who is the son of former Gator Doug Johnson, who also played in the NFL, also played for the Gators here in Gainesville. So they've got some talent on this football team. You throw in a guy like Thomas Whiteheart on the defensive side of the ball, I still think he has a breakout game coming. It's been a very special year, Holtz, and they have just, I think the biggest surprise for me is their offensive output, because 44 points against Bartram Trail, 38 points in the win against Oakley. That was on the road. No surprise they scored 35 against Gainesville. That was a running clock in the second half, but Gainesville is down this year. They've only got 1 win, but they did beat a Vanguard team that will be in the postseason this year and beat them by 20. They beat Columbia to start out the year. Columbia, although they started slow, they'll be in the playoffs this year. They played Wekiva in the preseason. So they played some tough competition this year. Now, is it good enough when you compare a Venice or a Lakeland, or heck, maybe even a team in their region, somebody like maybe a Niceville? That I don't know, but right now they're playing extremely well.
Yeah, and you got to like everything they're doing. Obviously, a lot of Florida Gator connections. Billy Napier making sure that these guys are staying home. So you're hearing a lot of those comments on the current team right now. Miles Graham, definitely one of the top defensive players, not only in the region, but in the state of Florida. I mean, when you got a guy like him on that defensive side of the football, you're going to be able to really play up against anybody, and they've shown that. And I haven't seen Buchholz yet. I have seen Bartram Trail. Saw them in a close loss against Mainland. Made me think they're a pretty good ball club. They're going to be there in the mix. But a blowout like that by Buchholz really, it felt like to me, based on the scores of their games, that was like a statement win. Like they wanted to come out and really take a team out that they felt like everybody's been kind of talking about. And Bartram Trail kind of played the national team of IMG Academy close for a half. No, they kind of got away from them in the second half. So to me, that was a big win for Buchholz. Mike, any other public school teams that you would say in these higher classifications that have kind of stood out to you this season? You did mention Gainesville. Obviously, they're kind of going through a rough patch, but any other team you feel like is playing well before we kind of jump into our Class 1R bevy of teams?
Yeah, they're, in our coverage area at Mainstreet Daily News, we have, we extend just north of Alachua County. We actually get into Bradford County. Right now, the Tornadoes are undefeated. Last year, they actually set the school record with 9 shutouts during the regular season. And they talked about the possibility of eclipsing that this year. Now, while they haven't done that, they've still been pretty good. They're undefeated right now. They had a nice win a couple of weeks ago on the road against a Miami team that, quite frankly, I had never even heard of, but not only had not heard of them, but they were pretty good. True North Classical Academy. But so far this year, only 3 shutouts, which is far less than what they had last year, but looking at some of their scores here, they gave up 13 in one game, 6, 7, 7, and 6 in the other games. They've only given up 39 points, and they're off to an 8-0 start. So I would definitely have to mention Bradford because they were in the state semifinals last year in Class 2S, and I think they've got a chance to make another run back to the state semifinals this year. As far as the other undefeated team in this area, we did have Oak Hall. They are not an FHSA member school. They play in the SSAA. They lost for the first time last week. The other is Hawthorne. Hawthorne is off to an undefeated start as well. They are the defending state champions in Class 1R, and that's another team too, Andy. When I've seen Hawthorne play this year, and I thought, okay, there's no way that they can be better than they were last year. You start at the top on defense with a guy by the name of Jalen Ruth, who's now at Vanderbilt University. Defensively, they had a lot of playmakers, several guys that went on to play at the next level, but they do have their quarterback, CJ Ingram, back, who is the son of Cornelius Ingram. He's having a phenomenal year. And I think it's a team that has a chance to win a state championship again this year. I know we'll get to 1R in just a moment, but as far as the schools in this area, those are probably some of the teams to keep your eye on right now.
And you know what? While we're talking about it, we might as well dive right into it because that kind of is where a lot of these teams, because it is a more suburban, rural area when you're talking about kind of north central Florida, Levy, Alachua County, and people don't realize if you're somewhere in a metro area in the state, you love these kind of teams in these cities and these towns because they really come out for their football. They pack the place out, and Hawthorne is that kind of place. People remember they won their first state title last year against Northview, defensive battle, but then this year, and I think that's kind of what's setting the Hornets apart right now from last year's team is the improvement of Ingram at that quarterback position. He's not just kind of a component. He's the main engine kind of driving this thing because he's throwing 4 or 5 touchdowns every week. It seems like every time I look at the stats, I'm like, this kid's throwing nearly like 300 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns a game. I mean, you got a team that's already really good defensively, and now you got a team that can really put it up offensively. It's like, I mean, I know Williston's right there and Coach Pruitt and his staff, they got they want to be in that dance, but unfortunately they're on the same region, so that's kind of the downside. But I mean, you got this Hawthorne team playing so well with Ingram playing his best football. I mean, Mike, is it just kind of a foregone conclusion that we may see Hawthorne raising the state title once again?
I think it's certainly possible. But again, tough region. You mentioned Williston. That's the other undefeated team in our area. The Red Devils are 8-0. I think you covered their game against Hudson last week. Hudson's a 2S program that was actually receiving votes in the state rankings, and they were undefeated. And Williston went on the road and ran all over them and handled that game pretty easily. So that's another team that was undefeated during the regular season last year, got a chance to go unbeaten during the regular season this year because they've got North Marion this week, which North Marion is down this year, even though they're a bigger program. And then so they close with Citrus High School, another team that's a higher classification, 3S, I believe. But if they should win that one. Citrus is down this year. Williston has already stepped up and played some tough competition this year. So I don't want to just say it's a foregone conclusion that Hawthorne will win the state championship because not only is Williston in their region, 1R Region 4, but you've got Newberry, which actually played Williston. I broadcast their game a few weeks ago. They actually score with about 4 minutes to play in the game to take the lead. You would think Williston being a running team, it might be tough for them to catch up. They end up scoring with less than a minute to play on a Statue of Liberty call by Robbie Pruitt. Pruitt won 3 straight state championships at Union County. He's won state championships at University Christian. It's kind of like, back in the day when Georgia had Vince Dooley on the sidelines. You never wanted to vote against or pick against Dooley and the Georgia Bulldogs. That's the same way with a Robbie Pruitt coach team. They learned something from their first round loss in the playoffs last year. But then you throw in, as I mentioned, Newberry. Newberry lost a tough one. They've only got 2 losses this year, and both losses were to Hawthorne and Williston. And right now in the 1A or 1R rankings, the FHSA rankings, those 3 teams are 1, 2, and 3. Williston, Hawthorne, and Newberry. You throw in Pahokee, which you never know about Pahokee, especially if you go on the road to Pahokee. Now, those 3 teams are ahead of them in the rankings, so those teams would have a chance to host a game. But I don't know. I mean, 1R Region 4 is so good, but then you look in 1R Region 3 with Madison County starting to come on. They beat an undefeated Swanee team. Union County, don't count on Union County. It was just a 14-0 game at Hawthorne a couple of weeks ago at the half. So, I'm really looking forward in particular to Class 1R because honestly, it's pretty wide open. There's a lot of good teams in there.
Yeah, and just seeing Williston last week, Mike, against Hudson, that rushing attack that the Red Devils have is something to behold because we're so used to seeing spread football. It's taken over not only high school, but the college and then pro scene. But then you see a team like Williston and Robbie Pruitt, he's true to his style of football. And that's that triple under center attack. And that's what I kind of thought was going to be the problem for Hudson is they don't see that. And that's something that teams in general just don't ever see is a quarterback getting under center. And now you're getting that fake to the fullback and you might go option right, option left. And you're going to have that split end right there to get the pitch, or maybe the quarterback keeps it. And really it was unstoppable. 503 yards. I had it on 34 attempts. I think that averaged out to 14.7 yards per touch. And for those doing the math at home, that is a first down and a half every time they're touching the ball. And it just seemed like, I definitely can't count out Williston against Hawthorne and Newberry as well. I know they got a win against Cal Christian of Clearwater.
Yes,
that was
Yeah, and then just following kind of piggybacking on what you said about Williston, they had 2 players over 100 yards rushing, including Jace McDonald, who ran for 222 yards on only 9 carries. They had over 500 yards rushing, 2 backs that went over 100, 1 that went over 200 yards. And think about this too now. They are not a passing team, but Shuby Coleman, their quarterback, he played at Gainesville High School a couple years ago. He can throw the football if necessary. So, they kind of lull you to sleep with that offense, and then they can hit you with a big pass. Like I said, I would never count out Coach Pruitt. But again, Hawthorne with a little momentum right now after winning a state championship. They've been to 3 straight state championship games. So they've developed a winning culture there in Hawthorne. The good news is those teams – the bad news is only one of those teams that I mentioned, that top 3 with Hawthorne, Williston, Newberry, will advance semifinals. But then when you get to the state semifinals, they'll reseed those teams. So we'll see how that benefits a team like Madison County or Union County, which beat Madison County for the first time last year. Could the Tigers sneak in there? I know they've been up and down this year with injuries, but like I said, it was just a 14-0 game at Hawthorne a couple of weeks ago. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch the 1R playoffs.
Yes, it is. And to bring up some teams that kind of flying more, I would say under the radar. They may not be contending for a state championship, but they're teams that we kind of think of when you think of teams that have been good in that area. I know Chiefland there under Coach Corbin, got to see him against Bradford, team you mentioned earlier in the preseason. Lost quite a few players from last season's team, including Dakota Fisher, running back. He transferred over to Fort White. Also Trenton. Trenton seems to be playing better than previous. Talk about these couple teams and just where they're at.
Yeah, the thing about Chiefland is that they had some injuries to start the year. They had their best defensive player playing quarterback, filling in at quarterback. If I can remember correctly, I think they have played like 6 different guys at quarterback this year. So they have, somehow found a way to still be in the mix. I mean, if the season ended right now, even with a 4-4 record, Chiefland would be in the playoffs. And I've always said, and coaches will tell you, get there and then see what happens. Can they, heal up some bumps and bruises, by the time the postseason starts? I think Chiefland's in pretty good shape to make the postseason. They get another good measuring stick, though, this week. They've got to play Madison County. Then they go on the road to play Frostproof. So they could end up having a losing record, but based on strength of schedule, I still think they're going to be in pretty good shape, come the postseason. And Trenton was a team that they beat earlier this year. They doubled them up 40-20. But, kudos to Trenton right now, because they are 4-4. And Andy, that's a far cry better than they were last year. They've really kind of turned things around. Last year, they did not win a single game. So they've turned their season around this year. Not good enough to make the postseason, but their season, I think they've got SSAA coming up. But again, quite the turnaround that they did from last year after going winless last year.
And for folks who don't know where Trenton is or how small the town it is, I did drive through it last year, and I just pulled up to look at the stadium because I'm like, I know they won a state title at some point, and got to see the state championship banner right above the scoreboard there over at their school. And it reminds you that Trenton they've had some good years just because of last year and the winless season. You got to think they're going to turn it around eventually. And that's kind of, their MO this year. Gainesville obviously is a team we think of when you think of past success. This year, they're just trying to figure things out. Obviously, the one win, but I mean, who would be a team, Mike, that you've seen this year that you feel like has surprised you, maybe other than Buchholz? I know you said earlier they've surprised you, but is there another team that has just taken you by surprise that you're like, wow, I didn't see that season coming from them?
Yeah, and I misspoke about Trenton because they're actually in 1R Region 4. Again, the two biggest surprises for me have been Hawthorne and Buchholz, just because of the fact that they lost so many good players, and yet they have somehow reloaded. Now, Hawthorne hit the transfer portal. They've got Andrew Zock from North Marion. He is a Navy commit. He's averaging 10 tackles a game on defense. They got Caleb Rollerson, North Marion's best wide receiver last year, catching balls, from Ingram this year. So they've benefited with some transfers. But again, getting back to Buchholz, just the fact that they've been able to go unbeaten at this point against a pretty good schedule, knowing how difficult, as Chuck Bell calls it, the District of Death with 4S District 3 with Bartram Trail and Oakleaf. And I know Fleming Island's a little bit down, but you've got some tough competition. Every week you got to come ready to play. Creekside, they had lost their top running back going into that game, but they were still competitive in that game. So to me, those are the two biggest surprises. I kind of felt like Bradford would be right there again, where they're at. Williston, maybe because they lost a 1,000-yard rusher from last year, I thought maybe they could take a step back after going undefeated last year. So the fact that they're still undefeated and looks like they will have an undefeated regular season, those have been the biggest surprises. Gainesville, no surprise because they struggled so much last year. They lost their coach. They got a new coach in Ian Scott. I felt like it was going to take them a little bit of time to kind of build that program. Only one win this year, and that was against Santa Fe. Eastside, I thought, might be a little bit better. They've kind of been up and down. The thing about Eastside is that, they've looked good, really good in the games that they've won, and they've looked kind of bad in the games that they've lost this year. Their 3 losses this year, even though it's been against Buchholz and Bradford and Newberry, they've come by an average of 33 points in those 3 losses. But in their 5 wins this year, they've won by an average of 35 points in those games. Now, they've got Santa Fe on Friday night and what will be for the 2S District 7 championship. If Eastside wins it, they're the outright champion. If somehow Santa Fe pulls off one of the biggest upsets of the year, and I still think it would be a big upset, even though Eastside's 5-3, but, Santa Fe's winless coming into this game. If Eastside wins that, they'll be straight up district champions, but Santa Fe can force a 3-way tie with North Marion in that district if they pull the upset at home on Friday night. tonight. But yeah, getting back to, teams that have surprised me, I got to stick with those two main Alachua County teams, maybe even that team from over there in Levy County, Williston, because of the fact that all three of them are undefeated. When you consider who they lost from last year, the fact that they're still undefeated this year, and in some cases, maybe even better. Some people have said that Hawthorne could be better this year than last year. When I saw them against Union County, it was hard for me to gauge that. I'd like to see them again before I make that decision, because right now I kind of feel like Williston and Hawthorne are right there together. And that's kind of how they've been all year too in the FHSA rankings at 1 and 2. Kind of, I think they've even flip-flopped a couple of times. But Buchholz for sure would probably be my number one biggest surprise. As you mentioned, new head football coach, even though he's been with the program, Chuck Bell has done an unbelievable job. And they've not only are they winning, but they're winning convincingly. But like I said, I think Miles Graham has been a big addition to that football program.
Yeah, and those are two teams that I think everybody kind of during the offseason was wondering, would they be able to kind of reload or get better? I mean, how are they going to do it? And yeah, they definitely have had some kids transfer in, but I mean, hey, that is the landscape of high school football now. Kids are going to transfer, and they are better for it. They are on their way to competing for potentially making a run to the states. Mike, lastly here, I know we're going to get ready to wrap it up. I ask everybody in the region, give me a bold prediction. I know we've kind of touched on some things that you might think may happen, but give me a bold prediction by the end of this 2023 season, something that's going to happen. He's like,
I'd like to say there's going to be a state champion from the area. I don't know if it comes in 4S with Buchholz, because I mentioned, once you start getting into, those bigger schools and even beyond, a program like Niceville, which is third in that region, and Buchholz is on top. But, how good is University High School out of Orange City? I don't know. I think even last week, University was number 1 in the FHSA rankings. And then after Buchholz beat Bartram Trail, now Buchholz has gone to number 1 in the FHSA rankings. Is there a team out there like a Venice, for example, which had a 28-0 lead at home last year against Buchholz before Creed Whittemore started, pulling off his theatrics and bringing them back, and ended up making it a close game. So I still kind of lean towards 1R. I think that we'll have an area champion between Hawthorne and Williston, and maybe even Newberry, because Kill McGriff, their quarterback, is only a sophomore. Caleb Woods, their running back, is only a sophomore. But those two young men are having a really good season. So I wouldn't count out Newberry. Hawthorne kind of handled them pretty good. But as I mentioned, that Williston game was just a 2-point game. 24-22 was the final, and Williston scored with less than a minute to play in the game to win that game at Newberry. So I would have to say, if we want to call it a bold prediction, that we will have one area champion from this area.
Well, hey, you heard it from Mike Ridaught. Could be Buchholz, could be Hawthorne, could be Wilson. Heck, it could even be the Newberry Panthers. We don't know. It could be one of those 4 teams. I'll take it as out of those 4 teams, one of them are going to win a state championship out of your region. So that's Mike Rideout's bold prediction there. And Mike, thank you so much for coming on with us. You can see Mike's work on the Mainstreet Daily News and also the Prep Zone. And Mike, we'll have to have you back.
All right. That sounds good, Andy. I appreciate the time. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
You as well. And that is Mike Rideout with the Prep Zone and the Mainstreet Daily News. Does great work over there. Check it out. And that is our 20th episode of The Coastal. Thank you for joining us.